Thank you, Dr. Madsen. It's a huge honor for me to be here today. I'm very grateful for the invitation and humble I must say. I'm not an expert in Catholicism, nor am I Catholic myself, so I'll be sharing from the Protestant side today, and I'm very much welcome. I hope, is it okay if we go a few minutes over in the discussion past 12 o'clock, or do we need to stop at 12 o'clock? We need to stop at 12 o'clock? But I would love to hear some feedback from you on any input that you have on the Catholic side too. So I'll skip my CV here. I'm just going to share with you my name cards, which are my books, and you can just look them up online. So let me jump straight into the talk, but first, happy birthday to the USCCA. I am very much, you just said something about you don't like building bridges. But actually, I really like this motto, and it is also through friendship that I have actually come to this organization. I think why I'm here today. So I'm grateful for the friends that I've made in this organization, and hope that I can make more friends in the future. So today, I will talk about 3 spheres of Chinese Christian engagements: society, church, and intellectual culture, in 2 historical eras. There are many overlaps across these spheres, and the divisions I offer refer to concentrations in the writings of different thinkers. They are not absolute, and by discussing some of the echoes in the Republican era and contemporary Christian discourses, I hope to probe the arguments for continuity between past and present Chinese theology. The contemporary theologian Lai Pengxiu just happens to be my colleague too. He once made an interesting remark when he was a young and freshly minted PhD at a conference in Europe. He told a group of Western theologians, "Don't ask what you can do for Chinese theology, but ask what Chinese theology can do for you." And so in that spirit, and building on Lai's advice, this talk will explore a set of theological discourses, just a little bit superficially, because I have to keep the talk within a time limit, but I hope to go into it in more detail in the ledging on the text. So the set of theological discourses in early 20th century and in post-Reform era China, and explores some correspondences and continuities at 3 discursive contexts corresponding to the 3 spheres of society, church, and culture that I just mentioned. So the first is public theology and intellectual debates on society and politics. Secondly, church theological discourses on contextualization or indigenization, and thirdly, Christian house church voices promoting cultural evangelization, or 文化福音化. In these discourses relating to society, church, and intellectual culture, respectively, culture is relevant to each type of engagement. Thus, taking into account the prominent position of culture in all historical Sino-Christian encounters, I want to link contemporary concerns in Sino-Christian theology, that's an academic discourse in Chinese academia, on Christian culture, history, and Christian theology. Sinicization debates that you're all familiar with, I think, through the work of Dr. Madsen. And then also the cultural productions of house church intellectuals with prominent concerns among their theological forerunners in Republican-era Chinese Christian debates. These 2 areas. The idea of this linking is in fact not new. So scholars such as the Chinese-American historian Yan Qi at Duke University and German sinologist and scholar of religion Christian Meyer have alluded to affinities between the early 20th century Christian debates on natural salvation and the Reform-era theology today, specifically within the elite academic discourses of Sino-Christian theology and Sino-Christian studies. And much of British sinologist Chloe Starr's work, I don't know if you're familiar with her, volumes on modern Chinese theology and a recent reader on Chinese theology, which, by the way, includes the Catholic side of things too. So it's a good resource. But she points to the intellectual gains also of these larger historical comparisons among theological approaches across discourses, different eras, and confessions. So Protestant, Catholic, and also Jinjiao, or the luminous religion in Tang Dynasty China, which also is referred to as Nestorianism in the early literature. Just to note, Starr is a professor of Asian theology and Christianity at Yale University. Her important book series, Modern Chinese Theology, 17 volumes, begins with a volume entitled Heritage and Prospect. a compilation that suggests the important links between May 4th Christian intellectuals, theology, and neuro debates, which she classes under Reform era thinking. Here I'm using post-reform for obvious reasons. Chinese theology, Star notes at the outset of another work, involves inherently Chinese approaches, including Taoist, Confucian, Buddhist, and other traditional conceptions of the human, as well as, for example, understanding the kingdom of God in light of Marxist economic theory. But I would add here that Chinese theology also includes the long-standing tradition of the learned critique of politics, society, and culture. As He Guanghu of Renmin, formerly of Renmin University, reminds us, the underlying ideology of Chinese rule from dynastic times to the present day, one-party rule, is not Confucian, but manifests, or only superficially, but manifests the ancient tradition of Chinese legalism. This is a tradition of autocratic rule by law, using and designing the law for purposes of statist governance, which liberal thinkers, including Christian academics and rights advocates, have opposed in scholarly writings and other public platforms. And the Christian voice, especially from the house church sector, has been prominent in this. We can note that in the 21st century, especially in the mid-2000s and 2010s, a vocal wing of Chinese house church Christianity that calls itself Reformed, and in Chinese that's Gaiguzong, or Presbyterian Zhanglaohui. In Chinese also, in the names of some of these churches use the Chinese word Guizheng. Reforming or coming back to the right path. I'll get back to that at the end of the talk. And this wing of Chinese house church Christianity has continued this critical tradition in Reformed theological registers. They espouse the value of that social contract theory that is narrated as having its roots in the Protestant Reformation as the most valid representation of a biblical understanding of covenant, and thus as a desirable basis for social organization in any state. However, their attention has recently also been drawn to China's own Christian history. This is an important recent shift. I think it's very significant. Although the reasons for this shift are complex and they also differ from scholar to scholar. Very recently, for example, one Christian scholar in Southwest China, who used to be more interested in reading Luther, translating the Bible, and teaching his students Dostoevsky, turned to a systematic study of the voluminous writings of Republican-era Chinese theologian. I think you all know him, Zhao Zishan. It may be because this important 20th century Chinese theologian was influenced by Kaibat, but the result has been a systematic rereading of Zhao's voluminous theological output by someone associated with the Chinese house church. So this is a kind of new trend. Similarly, one now imprisoned pastor who was once known for his admiration of John Knox and open criticism in widely read columns, he was a very vocal and very well-known public intellectual. After just over a decade of leading his Christian congregation and the style of current American Reformed theology, turned to a Chinese house church example for inspiration, namely the moral witness and the stance against government control of religion of Wang Dao, another very famous Chinese pastor, important figure in Protestant Chinese history. So the comparison between these staunch faith expressions of that pastor with his belatedly chosen 20th century theological role model, Wang Dao, is not an original one. One younger Chinese scholar has noted how China's Reformed house church movement has reinvented itself in recent years by explicitly identifying its actions and stances with the beginnings of grassroots Chinese house church Christianity. Actually, that's Wang Dao there. His final confession. So I want to turn our attention now to a few other figures and draw the following connections between the past and the present. So first, from national salvation and the Zhou Republican debates to Sino-Christian theology now. And I just pick two figures, Wu Yaozong, for Republican-era Protestant Chinese thinking, and the contemporary scholar of religion, He Guanghu, who's also been referred to as a theologian. Philip Winker in Hong Kong actually says, He Guanghu would long ago have called himself a theologian if that was a thing in Chinese academia. Actually, he doesn't. He refers to himself as a scholar of religion, but he is very interested in the Bible and writes about Christianity. That's his entire career. And then secondly, from contextualization in the Republican era, then to Sinicization now, and you have these headings here on the slide. That is Zhao Chen that I'm looking at, and Nanjing theologians and TSPM church leaders generally today for the Sinicization debate. And finally, from revolutionary Christianity and the Republican era, some usual suspects there, then to evangelizing culture now as an expression of the intellectual, cultural engagements of some of these house church Christians that I've just mentioned, who are not just socially engaged, but also among whom we find artists, poets, filmmakers, etc. And for that third engagement, actually in the paper I'll look at later on, and for today, the cultural critics in the Reformed main house church Christianity, but we'll keep that very brief because we don't have so much time today. But in connection with these figures and discourses, I want to raise a few questions. These are questions that Chinese theologians and lay Christian elites have been wrestling with in that era, but also today. First of all, what can Christianity do for China? How is it useful? How is it needed? How can it fill structural gaps, or how can it function for us? Secondly, how can the church, so the first one is more a question for society, but the second turns to the church. How can the church in China authentically express its Christianity, its Christian voice? Further, what and how can the Chinese church contribute to global Christianity? And thirdly, how can a Christian worldview transform Chinese culture and society? The last question alludes to Abraham Kuyper's forging of a Christian worldview. So Kuyper is another favorite of these Reformed hostage Christians. The forging of a worldview is more than an emotional conversion to Christianity, or just an intellectual assent, but it includes a conversion of one's entire understanding. Reformed Christians in China have tried to build this through unofficial Christian schools. It's very difficult, because if you go to an unofficial school, your options are to study abroad or to become a teacher in one of those schools. The options aren't that many. Then house church seminary teaching. These house church networks have their seminaries too that meet in certain places and draw seminarians from all over the country. And catechism class too. And they're big on catechisms, in fact, these Reformed Christians. They're actually changing some of the traditions in the Protestant landscape. Because of their interest in Reformed Christianity, this has also become a topic in the official Protestant church. Some of the books are sold in both sectors and translated too. But each of these domains and questions listed above must always confront the demands of culture, of Chinese culture. Because, as theologian David Jasper recognizes, China's traditional culture is probably the most substantial hindrance to the development of a religion which, of course, beginning in pre-modern times, was established within and based on the logic of Greek concepts, a foundation, of course, radically different from China's traditional philosophies. Further, traditional cultures and religion are not the only hindrances to effective theological translation. Modern Chinese secularity also differs from Western secularism, as does Chinese from Western Marxism, etc. Nonetheless, in every interrogation of the historical and envisioned relationship between China and Christianity, lay the assumption that Christianity has a place in the religious cultures, in the individual searches, and in the communal life of Chinese people. I'm not saying this, I'm just reporting this. But we know that at the moment the landscape of public Christian discourse, public discourse in any sector in China is fraught with many challenges, to say the least. On this topic, the contemporary scholar of religion based in Beijing, Sun Shangyong, argues that religion in China is politically tolerable so long and to the extent that it focuses on its priestly supportive functions rather than its prophetic disruptive appeals. If a Christian prophetic vision offers an alternative organizational structure for Chinese society, that vision must be opposed. Religious systems, on the other hand, that support society through the priestly administering of Christian services are tolerated and can, maybe even should be encouraged. So I'm quoting someone here. He writes, looking at the history of Chinese religions, it can be said that the Chinese government most tolerates religions with strong functions and weak organization. These functions include providing believers with an attractive system of meaning for life, providing supplementary ideological resources, offering arguments that legitimate the highest ruling authority. So a religion can also support state rule, providing cohesion and mobilization of resources, and moral support for society, providing assistance to vulnerable groups, etc. Christianity is a highly organized religion, Sun goes on. If conditions permit, it can also perform various functions in a wide range of fields. Judging from the history of the development of Christianity in China, historical events such as the rights controversy, the Boxer uprising, and the anti-Christian movements are consequences of the demonstration of Christianity's strong functions and strong organization, thus transcending China's traditional, legitimate, or acceptable church-state relational framework. Of course, it's not called church-state relations in Chinese, but 政教关系, the relationship between politics and religion. So, yeah, let's move on. Sorry, I just have a few slides because I was trying to follow the guidelines and not put all my speech on the slides. So this is the kind of minimalist show. So first, Christian discourses from Republican to post-reform era China. Here are the figures I've chosen that are Wu Yaojing and He Guanghu, a contemporary thinker. From national salvation then to Sino-Christian theology now. The question here is, what can Christianity do for China? What can Christianity contribute to China? This first question was tackled, of course, in the Republican-era debates on Jiuguo, or national salvation, by leading secularists and Christians with so many platforms that saving the nation turned into a kind of national hobby for intellectuals at the time. One famous proposal was that of YMCA General Secretary Yu Renzhang to save the nation through personality, 人格救国. Yu apparently also married the Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek in a bigamous union with a Western church ceremony, just as an aside. The question of what Christianity can contribute to China, from civilizational progress to an individual code of ethics and social justice, is also central to contemporary scholar religion, and is often seen as hasty or overly excited embrace of Western Christianity, or uncritical embrace of Western Christianity and liberal political ideals. He, a Guizhou native and long-term professor of religion at Renmin University, or actually was with him at the same time, at the very end of his career, so he retired from Renmin around 2016, and I was there from 2014 to 2016 and joined his classes, interviewed him. But anyway, he was one of the early signatories of the Charter of 08, calling for democratic reforms. He was one of the first 303 signatories, so he has a strong position. He writes that the most important lesson from the history of Christianity's successes and failures in China is that the transformation of political culture is vital to any culture transforming effort. Thus, He calls for a wide sweeping change in China's political culture. But he somehow never crosses the red line, at least he hasn't been in prison. He was kept from leaving the country at one point, around 2010, because different friends of Liu Shaobo's were actually kept from leaving the country so as to not go to Oslo to receive a word on his behalf. But anyway, so He calls for these sweeping changes. He is also in this group with some of the Shanghai liberals like Xu Jining, and they were filing complaints against Chinese statism well before Xi's ascendancy. He Guanghu's concerns range from the social ills of contemporary culture to the larger government structures that perpetrate injustices and have their roots in the imperial statism of ancient Chinese governance, according to He. Structures that he describes as dehumanizing and to which he believes Christian civilization holds effective antidotes. While Chinese Christians today are doves, He calls them doves. He wishes that the whole nation of China will take the dove rather than the dragon as its symbol, representing the ancient value of harmony and difference, a cultural tradition that China should treasure. But he also said that Christians are weak to fight the Chinese dragon as the dogs that they are. As an essayist who does not shy away from criticisms for the sake of showing concern for his nation, I think that He Guangfu can be compared to some of the Republican Christian writers whose occupations outside of the church gave them perspectives from which to judge and lament the social ills of the time. One example is the early Wu Yongzong, when he was working in Christian publishing, when he embraced pacifism and decried the evils visited upon his country. And Wu Yongzong wrote at the time, 90 years ago, "Our country is now passing through one of the most critical periods in its history. Everywhere we see decay, corruption, strife, and tumbling structures, all tragically reminiscent of past glory," wrote Wu in 1934, before embracing the communism which he later weaponized against its political enemies, including those in his own church, and that's a very tragic story. While Wu's social concern led him from the social gospel to communism by the mid-1940s, He's anxiety for China sent him on an ideologically opposite path, but perhaps no less patriotic. Wu was likened to an Old Testament prophet whose soul is searched by seared by social ills and injustices. From my own encounters with He Guangfu, who seemed never to have regained the weight that he lost when he was sent down to teach in the Guizhou countryside during the Cultural Revolution, skinny but fiery guy, I would liken him to something similar, maybe an Old Testament prophet. So Wu Yongzong from the start is far more judgmental in his criticisms of historical Christianity, especially, of course, Western Christianity. Here he differs starkly from He Guangfu, preferring to set Christianity challenges in its encounters with China, before later in his career turning to a full-blown anti-Westernism and anti-Western Christianity discourse, which he charges Western Christianity for its complicity and capitalist corruption. If Christianity has a place in China at all, Wu demands it ought to have a great deal to do with her present travail and its alleviation, because Wu also sees that China's youth are demanding just such identification of Christianity with the nation's plight. There are many other similarities that I could raise here between He and Wu, and of course many differences. I'm being a bit provocative in this comparison, but I think they are both patriots who are trying to come to terms with how to address the problems of their country and Christian language. All right, the next. Let me take the time. From contextualization then to sinicization now. And here, the question I want to ask, the theologians in the Chinese church are wrestling with the issues of indigenization. What does an authentic Chinese theology look like? In the 1920s, the issue of the church's indigenization included confronting the perceived foreignness of the church. How could Christianity shed its Western cloak and be made fully intelligible, not just to the Chinese intellect, but to the Chinese sensibilities, cultural sensibilities, as well as ethical demands? The stories of individual Christian leaders in Republican China who work closely with their missionary and other foreign colleagues, as Starr points out, highlight the tensions for Chinese Christians in negotiating their beliefs around a hardening national stance on foreign cooperation. Anti-imperialism fueled the anti-Christian movements of the 1920s and caused many to rethink their ecclesiology and views on the necessity of an indigenous, self-standing church. Zhao Zishen and his handsome guy here on the left and on the top. Zhao Zishen, the most important thinker in the indigenization of Protestant theology of the first half of the 20th century, so many scholars say, has over the last 2 decades become a fruitful object of research for house church, for academic, and for patriotic church theologians. So in all 3 sectors, interesting. Zhao may rightly be called, as Nanjing theologian Chen Yongtao, with Vintage Glühe, a German theologian, deems him an authentic Chinese theologian. For his concern not just about indigenizing theology through what Chen calls Dao Christology, and that's described in Chen Yongtao's book there, but also for his commitment to the health of the Chinese church, which he also thought had its role to play in contributing to the global ecumenical church. I think this aspect of Sinicization is far too often neglected. Namely, the church should not stop at its own indigenization, but in its indigenized and contextual form, it should think about and work out how it can contribute to the welfare and growth of those outside of its immediate context. Otherwise, what's the point? Zhao Zichen, unlike where I see the contemporary debates on Sinicization going, cared about both sides of this theological coin. The input and the output. Tan Xiaofeng, one of the leading scholars of Christianity today, based at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences in Beijing, wrote his doctoral dissertation on Zhao, and has gone on to author programmatic works on Sinicization. So you see here some of these connections too. It's not surprising that the TSPM theologian Chen, who authored a solid full-length study of Zhao's Christology, in a recent book chapter, sinicized this theologian of China by using the then current terminology without changing his essential reading of Zhao's contribution. And I'd like to note here that the TSPM has changed its English translation of 中国话, or Chinification, it used to use Sinicization and now use contextualization in its English publications, which TSPM chairman Xu Xiaohong claims has its foundation in the Bible, adding after years of English publications using Sinicization that the term is not preferred by the Chinese Protestant Church. So you see, the rhetoric is interesting. Sinicization today works on the assumption, as scholars like Tan Xiaofeng, Zhuo Xingping, and Liu Bin of Minzu University in Beijing repeatedly emphasize that the process of making the religion more Chinese includes efforts to indigenize religion on different fronts of political, social, and cultural, where the cultural Sinicization, as Liu Bin emphasizes, is by far the most important, historically interesting, and complex. If we take the descriptive meaning of 中国话, Chinification, Sinicization, or contextualization, as is now used, to be its actual meaning, we find many precedents in the contextualization debates of the pre-1949 Republican period, which was a time, of course, that was very rich in theological indigenization debates. Liu Tingfeng, Chen Jingyi, Wai Qingwu, P.C. Xu, Xu Baoqian, that is, Wu Laichuan, Tisa Chao on the Protestant side, are all eloquent participants in these debates. For Zhao Zichen, indigenization was a term that didn't mean arbitrarily or willfully distorting, reinterpreting Christianity or Christian dogma to suit fads and fancies. Zhao's indigenization of the Chinese church instead was one that cherished and saw itself as a custodian of the Christian truths upon which alone the church is built. So Zhao writes, Chinese Christians realize that the essence of Christianity and the spiritual heritage of the Chinese culture can be united into one single whole. The religious life of Christianity can be injected into the Chinese culture and become its new lifeblood. And the Chinese spiritual heritage can provide the medium for the expression of Christianity. Tisa Chao's universalism is quite inspiring, quite fascinating actually, and it belongs to the theological heritage of those who are sinicizing Christianity today. Right, Wu Jingsheng is on there. It's actually another part of this essay. We're trying to get him out of the slides, but here we go. From revolutionary Christianity then to evangelizing culture now. How can a Christian worldview transform Chinese culture and society? This question relates both to the revolutionary Christian discourses of thinkers like Wu Laichuan. He's in the middle on the right there. There are not so many images. She's very good. Put in that slide quickly, but it's a very important Protestant, very well educated Confucian gentleman. So it relates to thinkers like Wu Laichuan, in the 1930s and 40s, particularly. Actually, Wu Lei-chuan passed away before communist victory, and he passed away in 1944. And the cultural output, that's the contemporary side of today's house church intellectuals who welcome China's full-blown Christianization. That is, the Christian transformation of the individual, of society, and of culture. And they're actually interested in transforming culture through their cultural productions, engagements, critiques. In the Republican era, some Chinese Christian intellectuals expressed an extreme idealism about the possibilities of social and cultural transformation through the Christian gospel, even while denying the supernatural and presenting Jesus as a figure about deity. Wu Lei-chuan, 1870 to 1944, was one of them. His portrayals of Jesus as a creative realist Christian and the creative Confucian Christian correspondences and Christianity and Chinese culture, that was the seminal work, reflect a kind of revolutionary Christian mysticism that was perhaps one of the inspirations for authors who incorporated Christian themes into their writings at the time in Republican China. Lots of secular authors incorporated Christian themes like Elzhi, even Wu Xun and his brother Shi Dishan. In 1940, Wu penned a small booklet on the Christian hope, 基督徒的希望. In it, the Christian hope is one for social and cultural renewal. Jesus came to renew society, and Christians must actively participate in this renewal, which is the witness and proof of their Christian hope. This human-centered Christianity, stripped of its transcendence, hardly survives in Chinese Christianity today, which is more conservative. But what is evident among some Christian artists and writers today is that blend of Christian mysticism and social activism that Wu very consciously connected, not that Wu, Wu Lei-chuan, very consciously connected in his writings. Christianity meant for him a certain way of being in the world, rather than adherence to doctrines, which he found foolish and unscientific. For Wu Lei-chuan, that way of being in the world meant following Jesus' moral example. For the contemporary generation of Reformed house church intellectuals, that I've already alluded to there too, bottom, the idea of Wei Zheng, returning to the right path, reforming, indicates this idea of Reformed Christian life as a life of growth and of transformation. They also value moral rectitude and the Christian witness of grace. Moreover, a number of their most well-known Christian intellectuals are artists, writers, and poets. While those sympathetic to their human rights activism include filmmakers, human rights lawyers, and secular authors like Liao Yu, who is in exile in Germany today, who have become frustrated with the spiritual decay and moral ineptitude of their peers. And so they like the Christians sometimes. Essentially, though, they might pride themselves on turning house churches back towards systematic theology. Although they do this, I find among their most visible representatives a profound modern Christian mysticism that speaks of a faith which I think is present in some way in all the churches in China, but doesn't generally have a great variety of cultural outlets and expressions. Artists like Daozen, you might know him, he's quite well known in the States too, who says that he begins each day with prayer and waiting to be inspired by the Holy Spirit in his work. It is not only influenced by his reading of the Bible and Western art critics, but also by Taoism and by his concern for Chinese Christians. In his paintings, in the art criticism of Jia Changping, another scholar critic, and in the experimental art of younger generation artists like Luo Fei, you see a persistent drive to connect with and to point to a transcendence that comes from God and that is understood as an experience and relating with the divine rather than revolving around the self. In conclusion, the above attempts to trace theological continuities across historical contexts exposes the identity relevance dilemma that Christianity always faces in any context. Because where Christianity has expressed itself, it must confront the dilemma of its identity vis-a-vis the demand of securing its social and cultural relevance in the societies that it inhabits. If it becomes increasingly irrelevant, it also loses its identity, since the Christian religion is a charismatic religion that commands its followers to multiply by means of proclamation and making disciples, rather than by political expansion or force. In other words, Christianity must convince others of its claims. And in this sense, it must prove its relevance. If you listen between the lines today, you heard that socialism, from its earliest introduction in China, faced exactly the same dilemma. In this way, the methods of socialist and Christian activists would have naturally cohered. In China, moreover, both socialism and Christianity inherited the traditional cultural mandate that all products of culture and learning must benefit China, i.e., contribute to the general welfare. The identity relevance dilemma thus forces Christianity to legitimate itself by thus proving the worth of its contributions to the Chinese nation. However, if in the course of securing its increased relevance by adapting to the demands of the culture that surrounds it to the degree that it becomes that culture, it also loses its identity because its assimilation is complete. Maintaining that balance between securing its relevance and promoting identity presupposes that the Christian religion is more than a fill-in for other cultural and social functions, and presumes that it offers the world a good that isn't met by other institutions like family, education, or other social goods. In this sense, Christianity must prove its legitimacy by proving simultaneously that it is different and that it is not so different as to be unintelligible to its cultural surroundings. This is surely a difficult balance to maintain, and over the past 100 years, Chinese Christian thinkers have often veered to one side or to the other on the spectrum that moves from promoting one's identity or protecting one's identity to promoting one's relevance. I think that the continuities of theological commitments that are evident in Chinese Christian history inspire some measure of hope that this balance is being figured out. And that is something, at least I can learn from this history. Finally, when we think about hope in the different contexts considered, whether at a time of civil war and nation-building debates or in today's climate of many other turmoils, it strikes me that any articulation of hope for the future of Chinese Christianity, any Christianity, ought to meet a few basic criteria to be meaningful. First, hope must be realistic and not the fantasy of elite or self-absorbed dreamers. Secondly, hope must be intelligible and expressed in effective cultural registers. This is the innocuous meaning of sinicization and the general meaning of any contextualization. Thirdly, then, hope must be liberative, not coercive, as in the evangelization of culture through art and other expressions that liberate. Finally, hope must be relational and nurtured in structures of community, of mutual support. That is the social dimension. Or fundamentally relational is the mode in which we think and progress. Any theory of the human, not just Chinese understandings, is also a relational theory. Relational and contingent explanations of ourselves are the only ones that make sense to us. Do we have anything to hope for today? How hopeful is our world? I doubt that we do at times, but when I think of the statement of the prisoner who said, "I have no enemies, my hope is revived." I tell people when they ask me why I study Chinese Christianity that I do so because what I know about the faith that I grew up with is perhaps far too little for a proper understanding of Christianity. In a way, I understand those liberals and Reformed Christians in China who want to study and learn from the West. They just want a fuller understanding of something they have already found attractive, that they have fallen in love with. And because they are lovers, they are hopeful about their Christian projects. Lovers are the eternally hopeful. So the differences among the three approaches, and I'm almost done, the differences among these three approaches to Christianity that we've considered today in the different spheres of society, church, and culture are: the first, what can Christianity do for my nation, our society, etc., sees a need or a lack in its context and hopes that its chosen religion or ideology will meet that need according to its fantasy. In a way, it has already restricted its function and use by functionalizing it. This is not intrinsically bad, but might lead to a limited Christianity. The second, the idea of Christianity adapting to one's culture and context, also has some preconceived notions. but it is still more open because it seeks interaction, and interaction leads to transformation. Finally, the third, seeking transformation through relational encounters, as in the examples of mystical religion and evangelizing culture, and its theological openness and open expectations, I think, holds the greatest hope for transformation. It also asks, it is also this last approach that allows for and invites the inclusion of marginal voices, the weak, the needy, the critical, the estranged, because it has fewer preconceptions about what its engagement with Christ is supposed to look like. In this way, the mystical and compassionate expressions of faith come together. Thank you very much, and thank you for your patience.
Well, thank you very, very much for this extremely rich discussion. And, you know, it shows us how Christians, different theologians, leaders struggled with trying to make sense of the world in the 1930s that was falling apart. Society falling apart, wars and rumors of wars, and how the same kind of struggles is continuity with China today. And indeed, there's issues like this that we're facing in the American church in America, around the world. In a world where society is changing too rapidly for many, and the world is falling apart, it seems, wars and rumors of wars. So these are topics we all face, China faced. Learning from them can enrich us, expand our horizons, and lead us to finding a way to articulate the blessed hope that comes from the gospel. We're now, because we got started late, I think we should just leave this for your illumination, because standing in the way is lunch. I'll say a final word or two, since our president of the China Association, Peter Tan, can't make it right now. He had to leave early. So I'm the vice president, so I'll say just a brief word or two to bring our conference to a close. This was an extremely rich and blessed time for us to come together to engage in this kind of cross-cultural mutual exercise and mutual understanding. From my own not very good theology, I remember, you know, the miracle of Pentecost was not that people could understand each other quickly, because they all spoke Greek. These pilgrims coming around the Roman Empire. Greek was the don't law. That's why the gospel was in Greek. But the miracle of Pentecost was they could understand it in their own language, moving their own culture and language. And so that's the miracle. The miracle is understanding fellow Christians around the world in their own language, not just their own linguistic language, but moral language, the language of expression, of feeling, of heart, and so forth. And understand each other in their own language is something, of course, it was a miracle of Pentecost, and it won't be realized until the eschaton, the end of time. But insofar as we begin to do a little bit of it, it's the work of the Spirit, even now, in this interstitial period. So we began to do that during this conference, and I hope that we can all keep this energy and this spirit alive as we leave and go into our daily work. Now, I'd like to, first of all, I think, very briefly, because we have to have lunch, say a few words of thanks. We've got to thank very, very much the ambassadors who have been here, who have helped us in so many ways. Of course, thanks to our speakers and so forth. Thank all the people who have organized this conference, who have staff the tables, who have prepared the arrangements for all of this. And I won't go into all their names, but the board of this association did an enormous amount of work. I think maybe she doesn't want me to say that, but Ann Sway, our secretary, has done more of this heroic work in keeping us on track and keeping us together and really making it possible for this conference to happen. So we have to express our gratitude to her and indeed to all the people who worked so hard in bringing this, making it happen, keeping us on track. And so now the track has come to an end. But I hope that you will take from this this renewed commitment, and also I hope some of you maybe can sign up to be an affiliate, to keep in touch with us, and even if you're not an affiliate, keep in touch with us at the website and so forth, and bring these messages to your own local parishes and your local communities. And then, of course, have some hope for the next U.S.-China Association conference. It's already planned, at least the time and date. It'll be 2 years from now in Houston, Texas, at the St. Thomas University in Houston. So put that into your calendar, look at the date that's out there in your program, and think about us and pray for us, and hope to attend 2 years from now. So with that, I think I'll pass it over to Father Lee, who will give us some instructions. Okay. So thank you all for coming.